Hey everybody, welcome back to Hints and Guesses, my podcast. Kent here. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. Today, I'll be speaking with Eloise Skinner. She has a new book out called But Are You Alive? And the subtitle is How to Design a Life Worth Living. As you'll see, she's has a pretty interesting background. I'll kind of let her introduce herself as we get going in the podcast here. But maybe I'll begin with just a little passage from the introduction to her book here. Here's what she says. For myself, this work of becoming more alive has been my project over the last decade, and it's made my life challenging in a lot of ways. For one thing, it's taken me in and out of a range of careers. And in the pursuit of full aliveness, I found it difficult to settle on one path. And on a personal level, it's been exhausting. Phenomenology, existentialism, the meaning of life, trying to find your purpose. These topics are confronting, frustrating, and often yield no immediate results. The deeper you go, the more difficult it gets. And then there's the question of whether we're entitled to be asking these types of questions at all. It can feel risky to do this work, to move away from comfort and towards the unknown, and it often feels self-indulgent to be pondering our own existence. But at the heart of it, these are questions that human beings have been asking themselves and each other for millennia. How can we truly experience our fleeting moments on this planet? How can we live in such a way that the depth of our life becomes more meaningful than the length of it? How can we get to a position where we can look back at our journey and think, yes, that was my life, and a life I created and designed, and a life I lived fully? In the end, this work is an enduring human tradition, an instinct and an impulse toward deeper aliveness. I'm attracted to this book for a couple of reasons. I mean, one is just the title, because I think the question of aliveness or vitality is also to ask the question of meaning. They're like holding hands. And she does, I think, a really good job of helping us enter this existential and also practical terrain. As you'll tell from our conversation and from the book itself, that it's an extremely practical book. It's divided into body, mind, work, and self. Sort of her own sort of holistic frame for a way of talking about a full life. And she gives attention to each of these dimensions of our humanness in clever and interesting ways. And maybe more importantly, the book is filled with practices, tons of suggestions. Some of them come up in our conversation, many more in the book itself. And I appreciate that because, you know, I love ideas. I love musing on ideas and questions. But I think probably the most powerful way into living with a question is to change the way we live. And the primary invitation of most spiritualities is to enter that door through practice. And so I think you'll find some really simple and I think helpful suggestions in our conversation and in the book itself. So anyway, that's probably enough of an introduction to our conversation. I hope you appreciate it. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks again for all your support, especially to my patrons who make this podcast happen. Special thanks just for a couple of new patrons that came on and for those of you who offered so many thoughts and questions on the last two podcasts that I made with my wife, Mandy, about Israel. We'll consider making another one just because some additional things are sort of feel important. But we're right in the middle of our big move to Georgia. This is our final week in Michigan. We're packing the house, loading the horses, not a metaphor, and going to Georgia. So, yeah, so some huge changes. One quick kind of invitation for January. As you know, have been working with dreams and care a great deal about dreams. And as a part of the spiritual life, as a part of working with our own unconscious material, I've been into it for many years now. And in fact, I just returned from an Animus program, a DreamWork program where I was apprenticing. In any case, I'm going to be offering, I've done this once before, but I'm going to be offering a 4-week DreamWork course online in January. So if that's something that interests you, I encourage you to sign up. It'll be on Sunday nights in January, and would love to see you there. If you have questions about dreams, we're going to work with dreams in the intensive itself, in the class, as well as just provide some basic frames and ways of working on your own. So I'm really excited about that, and the details are on my website, kentdobson.com. I'll probably release a couple podcasts on dreams, have some ideas, so you can, hopefully those will be out in December. And yeah, maybe that's all I want to say at the moment. And yeah, let's turn our attention to this conversation. I hope you enjoy. Yeah, so the first thing I want to say is thanks for coming on the podcast, and thanks for sending me your book, and I enjoyed it. And I particularly enjoyed the way you described the practices. This book is full of practices, and you describe them. Some of them, as you say, are quite ancient and have a whole kind of history and sort of geography to them, but you also introduce them in a very accessible way. So I want to ask you, well, how would you introduce yourself? Like, what would you
Yeah,
say?
thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm such a big fan of the podcast. I really love the topics you talk about, so I'm really, really pleased to be here. And in terms of introducing myself, I sometimes struggle a bit because I have different types of career and things I've explored. At the moment, I am moving more into psychotherapy as my main focus. I specialize in a field called existential psychotherapy or existential therapy, which is really focused on like finding meaning and purpose and helping people navigate these bigger questions that we all walk through at various stages in life. And I've just started a master's in existential analysis. So that's my sort of academic focus at the moment. And then the book, which is quite recent, and a few other books before that. And then I do quite a lot of like sort of physical focus work. So I'm a fitness instructor. I do some dance and things like that, which for me has been really helpful to integrate that sort of body focused stuff as well into my more like mental mind focused work. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's a good introduction, but that's a mix.
Yeah, it's a good introduction. What so existential therapy, this is the terrain I'm interested in. I mean, just personally, I don't know if, I mean, not just therapy, but just existential questions in the most general sense. Um, and the conversation of meaning or the conversation with meaning that's possible with as you would put it. I mean, we should say the title of the book, but are you alive, as a question? And that, to me, that is the right kind of question. And okay, so I want to ask, first of all, were you always interested in sort of meaning oriented questions, or did that come up because of I don't know, like a crisis or did you trip and fall somewhere along the way? I mean, how would you, what would you say?
Yeah, I think maybe a blend of those two things, actually. I definitely had a few years of crisis or of kind of like slow moving crisis, sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my time and who I was in terms of my identity and yeah, how I wanted to shape my career. I started in corporate law, so I went to university to study law, and that was quite a traditional career path from university in the UK to studying and then training as a solicitor. And I really enjoyed that. I think it sort of touched on a few fields I really liked. Reading, writing, and arguing with other people are some of my favorite things to do. Um, But throughout that career path, I had the sense of maybe there was something else or something different that I wanted to explore as well. And I was really getting into spirituality at the time. I ended up spending a year in a monastic style program in London, which really shaped the direction of the next couple of years because, that experience of just turning inwards and spending a lot of time reflecting on who you are and what you want to do. I think that then sort of switched my direction into things like existential therapy and teaching yoga and meditation and those kind of more meaningful practices. And so, yeah, in answer to your question, I think probably a slow evolution of trying to find the right path and at the same time exploring lots of different things, which has been at times extremely frustrating and at times really fulfilling. So it's a mix.
Yeah. Can you say more about this program? I mean, how old were you at the time and who was in this program and what do you mean by monasticism?
Yeah, it's always a tricky thing to describe because obviously there are so many different traditions and ways of looking at it. And now in London, there are lots of different new, and probably across the world as well, but definitely in London, there are lots of new communities that are leaning into this kind of new monastic movement, which is taking ideas from traditional monastic communities like Benedictine, Ignatian, things like that, and formulating them into sort of more modern community-based organizations or community-based commitments where you're sort of joining a group of people under like a rule of life or something like that. So you're living according to a set of principles. This particular one that I did was hosted by the Archbishop of Canterbury in London. It's called A Year in God's Time, and it was essentially a year program with 2 tracks. One was residential, so you would stay within the sort of monastic style community, and one was what they call integrated, which meant that you were doing your kind of normal day job, which for me, I was a corporate lawyer, and then you would also do like sort of monastic style commitments, so you'd have a weekly meeting and then silent retreats and sort of prayer retreats and things like that. And yeah, the year was formed around a couple of different things. The rule of life was a big thing. And this is the idea that you have maybe like 10 commitments that you live according to these main principles. So that might be silence or sort of like poverty in the sense of like giving up things that you don't need or not acquiring things that you don't need, things like that. Community, study, service, like giving back. And then you try and formulate your life, even without like outside of the bounds of being with the community, you're still trying to formulate your life according to those principles. So it was an interesting experiment, I guess. And one of the ideas of the community is to see like, can this work in the modern world? Or is it that the ideas really were just suited to a particular time and place that just is inapplicable now? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's your feeling on that?
Yeah.
Does that work? I mean, I get the appeal. Like I mean, I've gone through different sort of seasons of attraction to the very thing that you're describing, but of course, not knowing how to do it. I mean, do you just cook one up? Do you start a commune? Do you join something that already exists? Is it contextually embedded? Like, I mean, it is true that it's like, I like that phrase, you were born for a time such as this, well, what is that time? What is that era? What comes out of the particular conflation of history and politics and ideas and religion and spirituality, and just monasticism belong in some other era? What did you feel? Can it be done now? And what would you say?
Yeah, it has such an interesting history in monasticism because it's kind of you can see it in different communities and different cultures all throughout different periods of time. So it is something that I think is inherent, that desire in us can be inherent in different contexts to sort of strip our lives back. And the thing that really attracted me the most about it, and this kind of comes back to what you were saying about my book earlier in terms of it being very practical, is I was already involved in spirituality, like going to a local church, and actually you probably know the church Oasis. And yeah, just really interested in how some of these theological ideas were actually being applied in reality. And so you can say that you believe a certain set of things, but what does your actual day-to-day life look like? And that kind of any kind of dissonance or like difference between what you say you're believing on one hand and how your life looks on the other hand, I found a little bit frustrating as I was kind of going deeper into Christianity as a movement. And monastic spirituality was something that seemed to really provide like an opportunity to practice some of the stuff that people say, you say that you care about this, well, here's a chance to really like live it out. Almost like an extreme form of spirituality in some way. So that really attracted me about it. That really attracted me to it. And then as to whether it works or not, I don't know. It's hard to say whether it works because I'm not sure it has like a particular end goal. um, it's certainly.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
I mean, before you go on, because that's interesting. Yeah. What is the goal? I mean, you're saying maybe it doesn't even have an end goal, but like, what's your suspicion? What's it aiming toward? Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
Yeah, I think, the particular program that I was on was aiming towards sort of a process of reorientation, like personal reorientation. The idea was to step out of your life and have some time to think, what do I actually want to do? Do I want to change career? Do I want to? I mean, a lot of people went from that program further into some kind of religious position or like religious commitment for their career. So it definitely there was that aspect to it. And then I think just finding some stillness and silence away from the rest of your life to really like turn inwards a little bit. Because we live lives that are so outward facing a lot of the time, especially in a city like London, where you're constantly kind of like giving yourself outwards. And it's almost like a countercultural approach to, being with yourself and actually just looking inwards or looking within a small community, which again is like pretty countercultural when you think, we live in these huge cities, but we might not actually feel connected to our neighbors or, people down the road or whatever. So yeah, in traditional communities, I guess they would have had a more long-term goal of union with the divine or something a bit more mystical. But yeah, I think maybe it depends on your interpretation as to what you want to get out of it.
Yeah. Okay. Something I was thinking about as you were speaking. So I've had some formal part of my graduate work was in comparative religion. And so I was really interested in early Christianity and some of these monastic traditions before they were even really called that. And here's an observation one of my professors had, which I thought was interesting, that monasticism only works if it's in relationship to the broader culture. In fact, you can't find any examples that are completely exclusive. Like even like the desert fathers or mothers or whatever, they're way out there, so to speak, in the deserts of Egypt and Syria, but they're really not that far. And people are coming and going. There's like a relationship between it's a kind of chosen community and the broader culture. And I sort of found that interesting in your options for this program. You could do it like a residential one, or you could just whatever, be a corporate lawyer and commit to the rule of life and come in and out. But that's part of, I think there is a conversation that seems important between a more conscious kind of religious life. I don't know what to call it, but I guess that's good enough. A kind of religious life. And then the broader sort of flow of culture or something like that. And so, okay, I'm working up to a question. I guess that was more of an observation. All right. So here's the subtitle of your book, How to Design a Life Worth Living. And I think, so I want to ask a question. How much say do we get in the design, and how much of the pattern or the tradition or traditions have a say in the things that give us meaning or make us alive or give us the feeling of life? How much choice do we have? I just feel like it's such an interesting tension because your experimental year with monasticism, you don't have, especially traditional, you don't have a lot of choices. You're given a rule of life, you're given an order, you're given, here are the times of day that you should be up to certain kind of things. Of course, there's always like, you're an autonomous human being, I'm sure there's some freedom built within that, but I'd like you to sort of play with the tension between how much choice do we have and how much of it is like consent to patterns or practices or rituals or ceremonies. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I'm not sure about what it would feel like or what the experience would be like to commit to a monastic lifestyle full time for the rest of your life. I think but then a lot of the people that I encountered who were full-time, had committed to that lifestyle full-time, they did speak of, finding a sense of liberation within the boundaries of like something so strict and something so kind of, like regimented. Even then, like the decision to commit yourself to that process in itself is like such a personal choice or like personal act that I think you can almost find like a sense of freedom within that choice that you've made, even if the actual experience itself is quite boundaried. But yeah, and this might be like crossing fields a little bit into something else, but the real sort of theory behind a subtitle like that is more like on the existential psychotherapy side, in the sense that in existential therapy, and especially the work of Viktor Frankl, like logotherapy, man's search for meaning kind of content or theories, this is based around the idea that you always have a choice of what to do, how to respond to the things that happen to you. And even if your options are practically limited, personally, you always stand in the position of authority.
Yeah. Okay. Let's look into that, because I'm attracted to this idea, logotherapy. Say a little more. Why logos? Why is that embedded in there? Tell us a little bit about Viktor Frankl and how who he is, but also how you came to his work and this sort of stuff.
Yeah. So Viktor Frankl, he was a psychiatrist and psychotherapist. He experienced life in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And he was already exploring these ideas of what it would mean to bring these questions of meaning and purpose into the field of psychotherapy, but really had the opportunity to kind of see what those theories look like in, possibly the worst circumstances that someone could imagine. So really testing out what is the power of someone who has a sense of meaning and purpose within a situation like that. Does it make a difference? Does it give you a sense of resilience? Does it give you a sense of hope? Is it part of almost like a tool that could be used in psychotherapy, in any other context, in a more normal life context as well? And when he survived that experience, he then wrote and then started to put together this book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is part autobiography of his own experiences and part sort of laying out this field called logotherapy, which is essentially a form of therapy that focuses around finding meaning, or finding meaning searching for meaning as a part of wellness or, general health. And this field has developed a lot since then. These days, it's a little bit broader. It tends to be a bit more expansive, take in other fields as well. So there's no real set, apart from logotherapy as a traditional field. There are other fields now which kind of get grouped or like brought together under the term existential therapy, which isn't really a technical term, but it's kind of just the summary. The idea is that having a strong sense of personal meaning, whether that is in your career, relationships, life in general, with your physical wellness, that kind of thing, can be a really powerful tool for, being grounded and present in the world and having this holistic or integrated sense of being well. And so, those were some of his ideas.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, what's the relationship between aliveness? Maybe you can, because this is how the book begins. I mean, with a question about being fully alive. I thought of who is it? Irenaeus, I think. The glory of God is a human being fully alive. You ever heard that line before? I'm sure you have. Maybe it's in there. I don't know. Maybe it's in your book. But yeah, this notion of aliveness. So yeah, maybe give us a little definition there. How do you understand aliveness? And is that, and what's the relationship between that phenomenon of aliveness and meaning? Like, what's the relationship?
Yeah, I think, one thing that I never want to do and I've always tried to avoid doing is like telling people what the answer is to big questions, like,
Yeah, well, I can tell you do a good job in the book saying there are several ways of understanding this, so fear not.
I'm extremely like hands off when it comes to telling people what the meaning of their life should be, which I think can be frustrating, because I've definitely read books before where I'm like, please tell me the answer to this question. But I personally don't think I know what the answer to anyone else's question is. I think it's just more that to engage in the question itself is the task or the call of our lives, and how you do that is kind of up to you and sort of fits with your lifestyle and what works for you in different ways. And that's really what I wanted to offer with the book, is like just a broad range of things that you could try if you wanted to see if it works. And even with this sense of like, what is aliveness? Again, I think it's such a subjective experience. And for me, it's something that would be less theoretical and more like embodied and felt and experienced in the world. So do you feel like on a day-to-day basis your life is full, that you feel engaged, that you feel present, that you feel grounded, that you feel like you belong here? All of these are kind of like the big existential foundations of your life. And then this experience of being fully in the world and not just kind of skimming through or like being on the surface, which is how I personally had felt for quite a few years of my career, that I was like checking all the boxes of like career, get a flat, do this, do that, like get a degree, like ticking the boxes off, and then sort of feeling like actually so disconnected from all of it, like it wasn't actually present in my life, that it was just that I was just like passing through without really touching it, if that makes sense. But then even then it's like it's hard to put it into words, but I think and everyone feels it so differently. But I think what I'm grasping for with the idea of aliveness is something that just encompasses all of the things that make us feel like fully here and fully engaged with the world. So whatever that.
Yeah. I like the word vitality, or even eros, like a kind of aliveness, a kind of an experience of aliveness. I actually, my personal feeling is that it's almost like joining something that is larger than your own individual. It's almost like it's not something that you would attain, but it's an experience that you sort of slide into, or that carries you along. This kind of vitality, and what you're describing about, I don't know, skimming across the surface of your life. I mean, this is a huge majority of people that I, work with, and they know what you're talking about, ticking boxes, and there's some kind of absence of vitality or absence of aliveness, that you can either consent to the question, or ignore it, keep ignoring it. I don't know, till you die, I suppose. And okay, so okay, maybe I'll just give people a sense of frame, and you can help me out here, because I think you did an excellent job of writing, giving people an accessible map, but also allowing it to be holistic enough to encompass the sort of broad spectrum of our human experience, like mind, body, work, and self. We can talk about self later because I have some questions about that, but mind, body, work, self. I mean, is this a frame? Where'd you get this? It's kind of like a simple way of saying it, or did it just occur to you over time that here's a way of framing it? And that's kind of an open-ended question, but what would you say?
Yeah, that's funny actually. My because I had to run the final manuscript past my tutor, my existential psychotherapy tutor, and he said exactly the same thing. He was like, "Where did this framework come from? Did you just?" He was like, "Is this your framework that you're committing to?" I was like, "I'm not sure." Like, it just kind of, it really, for me, those seem to be like the main categories, and from what I had observed with other people as well. Obviously, mind, body, soul is like a big way that those are often broken down. But for me, like career and work seems like such an important part as well. And like, I don't think they necessarily fit into, I wouldn't just put them into mind, for example. So I think for me, it was important to have a sort of work focused chapter where you're thinking about, not just what it means to have a meaningful life, but seeing as work is such a big component of that. Like, how are you going to shape your career? And especially in a world that's changing so much with careers, and today's newest generation of people coming into the workplace will have, let's say, like 12 or 13 careers throughout their lifetime. So it really is an opportunity to find something that is also makes you feel alive, at least to some extent, given you'll be spending so much time doing it. So yeah, mind, body, work. And then I was a little bit torn with self. I thought maybe just captured the rest of the other things that I wanted to talk about. And that was more, I guess, like leaning into the spirituality, the soul, kind of spirit side, but without really pushing it too far that way, because I did want to leave it open for people who also weren't interested in pursuing a more kind of like spiritual approach to it, who just wanted to feel a deeper connection to the self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about work, because I thought that was an interesting contribution. even, I work with people in a one-on-one setting and also in wilderness programs and things like that. And sometimes I kind of use an arbitrary separation between what I like. I got this from Bill Plotkin, between survival dance and sacred dance. And I like to say that they're just kind of in tension. They never really go away. Everyone has a survival dance. I mean, nobody gets to get out of it, even unless you have a trust fund. But even that, I wonder, like, no, there's still a survival dance. And then there's like a sacred dance, which is a little more like asking questions of meaning or maybe even purpose, but a way of bringing the shape of the soul into the world, something like that. But I have to admit, I often ignore questions of career, although that's where a lot of people want to start. What the hell am I doing with my life? And how did I end up doing this? And can I rethink it? And can I reshape it? And you said something very obvious at the beginning of that chapter, which is maybe I have the math wrong. You can help me, but something like what'd you say, 8,000 hours or something like that of our life? What is it?
Like 80. It's like 80. I think it's actually 90,000 hours.
Okay, so even worse than I thought. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. 80,000 hours. I was like, oh my God. All right. So it's not just a survival dance. This is a huge part of how most people live and move in the world. And a lot of what we think of as even identity, maybe too much so. I mean, people associate their identity with their work, but I just mean we can't turn away from the questions that work poses on us. And so, okay, give us maybe I want to ask you, take us a little into that chapter. Like, well, what would you recommend? What kind of questions are people asking you about work? And what direction do you begin to point them toward? Maybe a practice or two to deepen the tension that's rising.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many questions that people have. Like you said, it's such a big topic, and it actually tends to be one of the first indicators of if you're feeling a loss of meaning or a loss of vitality in your life. It actually tends to show up, let's say, in your daily working life, which tends to be the majority of your day. You're going out and doing something, and if that thing that you're doing isn't fulfilling you in any particular way, then that can sort of spill over into the rest of your life, because it's quite hard to split up your life into boxes and just say this part is doing great and this part is not, and I'm just going to focus on this part, but instead looking at the whole thing. So I think the main questions people have are, like you said, what am I doing? Like, a lot of the times, how have I got into this career? How have I ended up here? Is it too late? I get from a lot of people who have been in a career path for a particular amount of time and they feel like they've committed now and they're just stuck there. I think in the UK, at least, we encourage people to choose their career path really young, and especially for these bigger career industries, like, let's say, law, or like if you're going into medicine or teaching or something that's kind of a big industry in itself, you tend to specialize quite early on, and then you can continue that throughout your career. So you can put it on a track and turn around 15 years later and think, wow, that wasn't even, that was a different self that decided that career path. For me, picking law when I was 15 years old was like a very different experience to continually choosing law even at 28, 29. That's a very different circumstance, very different context. But yeah, and also how to find meaning. Say if it's a job that you are satisfied with, or that, like you said, fulfills that kind of survival instinct, it pays your mortgage, you feel like this is the job that you're settled in, it uses your skills, and maybe it's giving you good professional development, but you just don't feel that sense of like meaning and purpose in it. I think helping people navigate questions of, can you actually find or look for meaning in the existing career that you have if you're okay there, but you just feel like you want a little bit more depth or purpose within it. So those are a few of the things. And in terms of exercises for that last one in particular, there's an exercise in the book where I talk about, what it means to find meaning at work, and the idea of finding, not like necessarily an overarching sense of meaning and purpose in the job that you do. Let's say you are a yoga instructor, like me, part-time. Not necessarily. Well, I guess there could be, obviously, a lot of people find like a very, very specific sense of meaning and purpose, but you can also find it in smaller things. So it could be the interactions that you have with people every day are meaningful, or it could be, teaching someone a new technique or tool is meaningful. But like, not 24 hours of the job every single day has to be full of meaning. It's more just finding these like little pockets of meaning. And so, yeah, there's some of the questions that I help people with in terms of like the practice are, can you track through like a day at work and find what was the moment where you felt like most fulfilled, or, you felt a sense of connection? Was it, for example, mentoring someone, like mentoring a junior colleague, or having a chat to someone about like a new idea or a new, like, bringing in a new vision, bringing something to life? Or was it, seeing the results of your work come into effect? Sometimes we can be quite removed from like what we're actually doing. So if we're working for a big team, like the actual work product is sometimes invisible to us, but taking the time to think, what is this job actually for? Like, what good is it delivering? Can sometimes give you that sense of like, even if it's not overall meaning, it's just these moments of connection to the work that you're doing. So that's one thing. And then another thing that I think, another tool that I think has been really helpful for me, at least, and this especially when you're thinking about changing careers and you think, oh, I have no idea how to change industries from, let's say, corporate law to psychotherapy. That seems like a huge jump, and it's like really like scary to think about doing something like that, and it feels really unstable and uncertain, and there's going to be a huge bit in the middle where you're like not good at that thing and you're also not good at the new thing, so then you just have to like be bad at everything for a while. But yeah, helping people sort of shift or transition their current skill set into the one that they want to develop can often bring like a real sense of meaning and purpose. And this is sometimes called like job design, or like, tailoring, like job tailoring your own career. And this could be as simple as, say, if you want to be you're in a big like corporate job, but you want to be an author. This could look like, offering to write something that was in the boundaries of your corporate career, like within the daily responsibilities that you already have, offering to write a paper, or like offering to write an article or something, like getting those skills set up in a way that will help you sort of bridge the gap between this career and the next one. So stuff like that, job tailoring, job, integration of one career into another, I think can be really helpful.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I guess it depends on people's personality, but many people have this sort of all or nothing. Like, I have to blow up my career in order to be an author, or to use your example. But yeah, it's like you were saying about Viktor Frankl, maybe there's always a choice. There's always a choice in the circumstances in which we find ourselves in, that it can, by making the choice, we start pointing or aiming toward the thing that we're longing for, the thing that somehow wants our attention in some way. And yeah. Also too, just, I mean, it's kind of an aside. I was thinking just about the power of work itself. I mean, in some sense, for some reason, I was thinking about the Genesis story. It's seen as kind of a curse in the, now, humanity is cursed and has to till the ground. And, but it's also kind of like, it's one of those blessing curses at the same time. It's like consciousness brings a sort of existential terror with it. We're going to die. Life is hard. Things aren't always going to work out. The earth isn't just going to do whatever we want, whenever we want. There's toil involved, but it's also part of what makes life meaningful. And to toil in anything at all, to ask, what good is this job doing in the world? I've never worked for a big corporation, so I can only imagine sort of being swallowed up by someone else's agenda or purpose. But you're also saying there, somewhere buried in there might be a sense of freedom, like how I show up in the particular thing that I'm doing. I might be doing some good in the world, or might fulfill at least a sliver of meaning or purpose. And and maybe one more piece, which has to do with vocation in general. Like, my understanding is vocation in vox, in Latin, comes from voice. And that is a much more like subtle and sort of sophisticated way of talking about career, as a voice in the world. And that seems much more like a challenge that you can rise to than sort of something you have to just bear as a burden because you got to work for the man or whatever for the rest of your life. It's more like, no, this is an opportunity to put your voice or your way of being in the world in some way. Anyway, I mean, you can respond to that if you want. I mean, it's just kind of an observation. I'm just emphasizing how important I think this chapter is, and I think, and also how frequently people come to existential questions through questions around work.
Yeah, and I think also it's interesting about the Genesis, like looking at it from the Genesis story perspective, because there may well be a time, probably fairly soon, where a lot of us will have our careers taken over by AI or technology, like, and will just not be as helpful. You can see that in a career path like law, for example. A lot of the jobs that were previously done by paralegals or like trainee lawyers can now be automated. Like, it's much easier to deal with, say, like document management, but with technology and things like that. And that applies to jobs across the board. So all types of jobs are going to be altered or drastically changed in the next however many years. And so then there's a question of, okay, but if we end up at some point not working, then who are we? Like, then what do we do? Then how are we going to spend our time? Then what matters to us if we don't have these like 90,000 hours in our lives of like having to do stuff? Then like, who are we at the end of that? So I think it's an existential question that may become more relevant quite soon, probably.
Yeah. My guess is we'll break the world in some way and say this is unacceptable and get back to another form of work. I can't imagine a kind of utopian, my bills are taken care of, AI does all the hard work and I just get to chill. That's not going to work in the human spirit, I don't think. Plus we're likely to murder each other. It doesn't solve the relational dimension of life, and that's a huge part of meaning, as you also point out in the book. So, okay. Yeah. I want to talk about the self chapter, and let's see, I'm just going to maybe tug on a few threads here. This is kind of to reiterate something I said before, which is what I really appreciate about the book is that everything you say in here, there's a practice associated with it. You could even wonder which comes first, the longing for meaning followed by a practice, or the practice awakens the meaning itself, or clarifies, like lights a lamp for the right kinds of questions. Maybe it's like a little of both, but everything, particularly these practices in the self chapter, I think are quite powerful and are not unrelated to things I recommend people do. But maybe first just give us like a 101. What do you mean by self here? Because you said a while ago, it kind of encompasses everything else. So what's the everything else that we're talking about here?
Yeah. I guess it might be different for different people. For me, it tends to be things like this is the most lawyer focused approach to writing about these topics, because I'm always like, it depends. It really is. It depends on your individual circumstances. So I can't generalize. But what I would say is, like, it tends to be things like dealing with transition, change, the finality of life. Practices that allow for just real turning inwards. So like Sabbath focused practices where you're really just pausing, things like building a rhythm into your life and your days, how we choose to shape things for ourselves, things like the rule of life. So these bigger ideas around how you're actually going to live. So I'm not sure if I would summarize those other than being like very personal practices. They're really addressing yourself on the level of like who you are as an individual.
Yeah. The rule of life. It's funny because so I lived in Israel for a few years, and it was a time, yeah, I was in historical critical scholarship, academic world. And I read most of the early mystics, along with, because my interest was in early Christianity and Judaism, and sort of the conversation that was taking place between these two worlds. And when I came back from this like sort of totally disorienting and profound and wild time in my life, I was really quite lost, to tell you the truth. And I took a course from the Dominicans here in town on the foundations of Christian spirituality. And it was amazing because I was reading some of the same texts I was reading like a year earlier, but just not in an academic setting, but in a, I don't know what the Dominicans are quite quite academically oriented, but it was a context of spirituality. Nuns were teaching the class. And anyway, I went through the whole course, and it started to get harder. That's like the content was like getting too much. I was like, and then they asked us to write a rule of life, and I bailed. I couldn't even do the final couple of classes because that invitation was like a bit overwhelming for me. Like, what do you mean I get a say in this? First of all, that's troubling, because whatever I say, then am I going to have to live by these things, or what would I put in? And I think you did a nice job of making it less ominous, for one thing, but particularly by pointing out values. So I'd like you to just speak a little bit about how you understand a rule of life and how it relates to our values, and how would we uncover our values in the first place? Something like that.
Yeah, I think definitely the intimidating nature of the rule of life is, there's almost like two sides to, I think, why people can be put off from doing it, or why people don't find it, like, wouldn't necessarily look at it as a tool that they want to use. One is the kind of like, it seems so big, it seems so intimidating. On the other hand, you have people who are really up for doing something like that because they feel like it actually, or in reality, it doesn't really matter that much because it's hard to actually, once you can put it down on paper, but it's actually hard to make yourself commit to it. Or so there's almost like two sides of the spectrum for why it might not be, or people might not see it as a useful tool. But I think the idea on the kind of more intimidating side, what I wanted to communicate to people was that it really doesn't, even though it is a rule, it's not a rule that has any like punishments associated with it on the other side of like, if you didn't live up to the rule, now you have to like repent and like start again, kind of thing. So it doesn't have, it's not a judgment tool for yourself, or like something that should trigger any kind of like shame or guilt about how you live your life, but it's more an opportunity to, I mean, the first step is to kind of get it all down on paper. And even the process of, like you were going through yourself, the process of trying to think of those things can be really challenging and really kind of like really reflective in a way that we're not often given the opportunity to do, because it's very rare that someone would sit down with us and be like, okay, what are the main things in your life that characterize how you want to live? And can you put those into like 10 bullet points? I think that's a really difficult thing to do. And if you take it seriously, it could probably tell you quite a lot about yourself. So yeah, I think in terms of like making that a little bit less scary, I like to think of it as just a self-exploration exercise. And when I work through this, if I'm ever working through it as a tool with other people, I always just say, you know, write everything that kind of comes to mind about who you are and how you like to live in the world. These kind of big categories, like, you know, I see myself as someone who has integrity, who trusts other people, who's honest, who's good at communication, who tries to give back and like do some kind of acts of service or contribute something to the world, who has a voice, like you were saying before, who can like, you know, say what they think and move the world forwards in some way. All of that can just go down on the paper. It doesn't need to be like perfectly 10 rules that you just come straight off the top of your head, kind of thing. And then the process of like sorting through that information and thinking which of these really aligns with the truest sense of who I am. And this is only also for right now. This is like at the moment, and you can always rewrite the rule of life if you wanted to. So it doesn't have to be forever. But yeah, just trying to categorize, pull some of those things together into bigger categories. So some really traditional ones might be like the idea of service, for example, trying to give back or like contribute something. Another one might be sort of learning, like having a curiosity or a growth mindset about the world, like always wanting to develop yourself and learn new things. More personal ones like honesty and integrity, authenticity, things like that. So yeah, and then when you have your main categories, I think it's helpful to write a little bit of a sentence. This is how we did it in the monastic inspired program. You would write a couple of sentences beneath that about like what that actually would look like in the world. So say if your value was service, you'd write, I'm someone who believes in, giving back in some way and contributing the gifts that I have been given or that I've developed over time, sending those back into the world in some capacity. So this would look like giving some of my time to an organization that I care about, or it might look like using the work in the work that I do in my everyday life to like direct it towards a cause or something that matters to me. And then once you have those little summaries for each category, I think one thing that's helpful to do is just give it like a week or a month and see what it feels like to try and bring that into reality. And this is kind of the other end of the spectrum of people who think, okay, well, I can have a sheet of paper that says 10 words on it, but like that actually isn't going to change my life in any real way. I think then give it some time to see if you can bring it into your life in a practical way. And this could be any time you're faced with a choice or a decision where you're pausing and you're noticing, I could take this option, maybe the easier option, or I could take the option that really aligns with what I said that I believed in. So that could be sort of with the service example, it could be, should I spend this weekend doing this, or like, should I spend it doing that? And which one would align most deeply with my sense of like who I am or how I say I want to live, or like spend these opportunities of time. And just noticing wherever there's like a bit of a conflict between what you've written and what you are actually doing. I think even just noticing that without criticism or labeling or self-judgment is really valuable, because it teaches you, that's where the differences are between where you want to be and where you are, or where you think you are and where you really are. And it's all information.
Yeah, I was thinking about that line from David White. He says, you'll find out what is real and what is not. That's how I actually feel about values or stated beliefs, and they're worth exploring with your mind and with your imagination. But then you find out if you find out by embodying them. And I mean, we're likely to lie to ourselves most of the time anyway. Yeah, I value these 5 things, but when it comes down to it, how am I going to put one foot in front of the other? And then those are those like clarifying moments, really, a kind of winnowing down of how we'd like to be seen and how we actually are. And that's where like the good work is, I think. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. If you don't mind, let's see. I'm really interested in, because it just rings my bell in a perverse way, the death meditation. What does death have to do with this? And yeah, maybe I'll ask you about something else, but yeah, well, I mean, how did you come to this? And then maybe I'll say a few things about my relationship with the contemplation of death and meaning. So what would you say?
Yeah, I think this is a real existential theme of looking at the finality of life and looking at what it means to live a good life that also comes to an end, and how it feels to have an end, if that makes sense. And we live in such a culture that can often deny the finality of life, or seems to sort of bypass or ignore it. And I think it can be really valuable. I mean, other traditions or other cultures have had in the past, or have now, more of an importance of like holding the end up as like something that is present even as you're living through your life, like having these periods of like reflecting on the finality of things. Actually, it reminds me in a traditional kind of yoga vinyasa class, or in a traditional yoga class, at the end you have this meditation shavasana, which is like the corpse pose, the sort of death meditation, which again was kind of what informed my inspiration for some of the stuff in that chapter. But the idea that you could almost experience these moments of finality or contemplation of what it means to be at the end of something in your everyday life, even as you're full of vitality and like going around in the world, like doing your best work and, being true to who you are, but also at the same time holding this sense that there is actually an end. And what would that mean? And how does that impact what you do on a day-to-day basis? and not to be too intimidated or like to. I think sometimes we can have a sense of like not really wanting to look at it because it seems too unfamiliar or too scary or too final. So yeah, these ideas of death meditation, I mean, they show up in a lot of different cultures. There's like a Buddhist form of meditation, the one I mentioned, yoga, shavasana, and the one I talk about in the book is like a stoic, sort of more stoicism based death meditation. So the idea that, you know, life is final, and actually that in a way is what makes it so precious. And I was actually asked to comment on an article the other day about like, should we live forever? And like, what would it mean? Because obviously a lot of people trying to develop things to extend our longevity. What would it mean if we actually could live forever? What would be the existential implications of that? And obviously that, you know, as much as it would be great to live much longer and have more time with the people that we love and doing the things that we really want to do, there is also a really real existential importance in like the fragility of life and like making the most of every moment, because it is so fleeting. And that's almost what gives it its kind of significance. It's a bit of a stoic idea, but also existential.
Yeah. Yes. I'm often curious about this zombie phenomenon, like in pop culture. And I mean, I can go in several directions, but this is what's occurring to me right now. That, okay, yeah, we can extend life, but it's likely to look more like that. Longer years, but half alive, you know, or half dead, or whatever the combination is. And yeah, it's that's an, just because we can doesn't mean it will increase meaning, purpose, truth, compassion, relationship, sensitivity. I want to read one of the Stoic quotes in here because I thought it was awesome. What harm is there if you whisper to yourself at the very moment you are kissing your child and say, tomorrow you will die? So likewise to your friend, tomorrow you will go abroad, or I shall, and we shall never see each other again. Yeah, to me, I mean, that's just totally.
Yeah. It might be a bit traumatic if you say that to your child.
I don't know. Maybe. Well, we, like you said, we're anesthetized, or what if that's maybe that's not the right word, but it's we try to keep death at arm's length, and it's and we suffer because of such a thing. We suffer with the kind of like denial, and sometimes I'm not trying to be clinical. So I mean, I think about the word depression and as pressing down, you know, and for sure we press down finality. We press down the nobody gets out of this alive. Like, it's gonna happen. We're all gonna die. And by bringing that back in a kind of loving way into into conversation with our life, and you know, like you were saying, traditional cultures the world over have had a much closer relationship with death than we have in the modern world. And so I just really appreciate the practices that are in here. I've done many similar things. Like, in fact, one time, well, when I was doing one of my major life transitions, leaving the world of megachurch land and not doing anything for a while, I made, it's a practice I got from Animus, where I've done my training as a guide, but I made a lodge in the back of my property, which I called the Death Lodge, and I put little skulls that I found on the ground, and I mean that I wasn't even looking for. I'd be like, oh, that's going in the Death Lodge, and I would sit out there, and sometimes do nothing other than just to allow my imagination and my sort of the somatic feeling that comes with that, of my own finality, that I'm not going to live forever. And even sometimes as part of the Death Lodge practice, it would occur to me in my imaginations that certain people might come. Like, if I imagine myself on my deathbed, who would be there, and what would need to be said, or what's left unsaid, and what am I okay with leaving unsaid, and what am I not okay with leaving unsaid, and what details do I need to take care of? It's funny because after sometimes I'd sit out there, I'd have I'd have a real sense that there were some practical things I need to take care of. You would think it would be the opposite. Like, we're all going to die. What does it matter? Let's get drunk or something. But it's actually much more like, no, I don't want to leave the house a mess. Like, I'm going to clean up this shit in the corner of my garage because I don't want to live like this. I don't want to pass this on to someone. So even like it's a very small and minor thing. But anyway, I really resonated with that section of your book. And of course, it comes in the context of a lot of other kinds of practices. I don't want to give people the wrong impression that you're, trying to entice people into a kind of a morbid landscape. But it actually has to do with the question of being alive. Yeah, I don't think you can really feel fully alive unless there's some consciousness of the limits. It's like what you were saying about monasticism. Limits potentially provide some freedom. And death is a limiter. And within that, I think it opens up a kind of mysterious landscape of freedom. At least that's my way of putting it.
Yeah, I love that. I was thinking while you were talking, this idea of the two halves of life, the kind of, well, I read about it mostly in Richard Rohr's book Falling Upward, but also it's that idea is also in other places as well. But the idea that, life does have a shape to it. It has like a rise and a fall. And so it's not just like this linear like thing that's going to go on indefinitely. Like it has like a structure or a rhythm to it. And in that structure is really like where the fullness is, like finding the shape within that. If you're going for the first and second half idea, the idea that you are like growing, you're moving into a different season. And then just like everything else in the world, like things change and they develop and things end and new things begin. And I think there's some real depth in that idea as well.
Yeah. I love that's when I first heard the phrase second half of life was from Richard Rohr. It comes from Jung though. He talks about the first and second half of life. And maybe I don't want to open up that door right this second because I want to ask you about something. And this is something I was wondering as I was reading the book. I was like, there's a lot of practice in here. We've only just touched on a couple. We've got mind, we have body, we have work, we have self. Whoa, that's a lot. How would I even, begin a relationship? Do I just pick one? And of course, you're probably going to say you could pick one, you could do them all. It's up to you. And I totally believe you. But you also did something which I thought was kind of a provocative challenge in the like postscript of the book or whatever. Maybe it's just the last chapter, which is the idea of a 30-day challenge. So I'd like you to speak to that. Because I don't know, there's something about the fall that, in our hemisphere here, and the turning toward winter, the way the light is changing so rapidly now that kind of like, for me at least, kind of pulls human beings, pulls me into, I guess, a more introverted, introspective time period. It's what animals are doing. They're like starting to hibernate or whatever. They're starting to collect things that they need to survive for the winter. And so I think I'm asking you about this 30-day challenge because I think now's a good time for such a thing. There's something about the season that might call for it. So what do you have in mind with, what could you do with this 30 days? And describe it a little bit, if you would, please.
Yeah, I haven't done something like that before, like put that into a book at the end, because I have a few other practical style books on different topics, but I've never tried to do like pull it all together like that. The reason I actually wanted to do it was because I had this other book called The Purpose Handbook, which was out a few years ago. And one of the things, it was very like exercise based, all around finding a sense of purpose. It was a bit more practical than this kind of more comprehensive meaning and life and body and soul type book. But one thing that I heard from a few people who really wanted to like do the exercises fully is that they just found it so kind of like you were saying with the rule of life, they found it so intimidating to actually do to look at the questions and to make themselves do it. So they would read the book and think, I would love to do that, but actually I can't. There's something like preventing me from like getting onto the step of doing it. And so what I wanted to do was like give people just a template in which you can move through it quite quickly. You don't have to like set yourself this one exercise for a month and really force yourself through it, but you're kind of just exploring, you're treading quite lightly, you're just going through it, and you're seeing, what would it look like if I spent this whole month just focusing on this and then this and then this and then this, and then at the end you see what you're left with and what you want to take forwards and what you want to change up. And I think all of these like personal development type stuff is always subject to change, because it's like our lives are evolving all the time. So it doesn't make sense to be like, my routine is this and I do this every single day for the rest of my life, because then you move houses or like you change careers or family. Like it just doesn't work like that. So I think to hold yourself to something too rigid for me has never really made sense. So I think I see it more as like building up a toolkit of practices. You're like, at this time in my life, this works really well, so I'm going to keep with this. And then when I'm changing careers, I also want to focus on this. So then you're looking at different aspects. But yeah, I had a reader get in touch to say that she'd done the whole thing and like journaled it, and she sent me all of these. Like it was amazing. She'd like really done like a little calendar and like checked off all the days and like had all of her. So I think it really suits someone who needs a bit of who would benefit from a bit of a template, like some way to move through it. And also maybe on another type of reader might be someone who just feels like overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that they want to do or that they want to try. Here's like a way that you could just go through day by day. I'd be interested to know how different people find it, because obviously everyone has such a different approach. And as I always say, I never want to tell anyone what to do, but I do want to offer some options.
Yeah. Well, it's almost better just to say, this is what works for me, and you can go find out, So yeah, which is essentially what you're doing. So, okay. Yeah. I feel like, I want to thank you for your time and for sending me your book and for speaking with me. I hope people find some valuable threads here, and that I hope it piques their curiosity around practice, around ritual, around ceremony. Ceremony is another way of talking about what we're talking about. And I do know, my feeling is that the modern world, I don't really know if I was about to blame the modern world, which sounds kind of ridiculous, but I think there is a kind of crisis of meaning happening. I mean, it's sometimes very on the surface and sometimes pretty far down. But I imagine most people people are listening to this podcast, I hope, know what have a relationship with this kind of crisis of meaning and are asking the same kinds of questions. And I hope they'll find practical things to bring into their life. It's always, there's a kind of, you don't know how much of life is addition and how much is subtraction. And I never know how to answer that. It's kind of like what you're saying. It depends. It depends on what, I mean, sometimes it's adding a practice and sometimes it's subtracting 5 other things, but I at least I find the tools that you're pointing toward to be very helpful and personally resonant. And I've tried many of them. So, anything you want to, I don't know, anything happening for you as we're speaking, and something that's coming up, something I missed, something you wanted to tug on a little bit? It's a kind of parting thought. Anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think just what you said at the end there is really, that is the approach that I wanted to take. And one of the reasons I enjoy your podcast so much, I think, is because you have this really like exploratory approach to some of these sometimes intimidating topics that can be kind of big, and people, it can be easy to not want to engage with them at all. But for me, I think an approach that is just curious and kind of going into different areas and seeing what works and trying different things. And I think also I always want to emphasize that this kind of stuff should be interesting / fulfilling / exciting. Like I never want anyone to feel like the self-development stuff that I talk about is a bit of a tedious kind of like, gotta do my everyday my everyday work on myself. But like for me, these practices, and you got to find something that fits or resonates with you, but the ability to just really enjoy the process of learning more about yourself and your life, I think, is the real gift of some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, and your title points to such a thing, that you're asking the question, but are you alive? And I mean, there's again, that kind of aliveness and vitality is sort of hidden in plain sight in much of what you're describing. So Yeah, this feels like a good place to land. Thanks for speaking with me.
Thank you so much for having me.